Well, of course, earthquakes are rare in Rhode Island, and when they do happen, many people don't even feel them.
And tonight, we're learning more about the history of earthquakes in New England. Chief Meteorologist Tony Petrarca continues our in-depth coverage now from the live Pinpoint Doppler 12 Forecast Center.
And we do have a history, of course. The tremors or shakes around here tend to be very, very weak. On occasions, you'll get a moderate one. But one more look back at this morning's tremor, which registered 2.3 on the Richter scale. That is considered very minor. But when you look at the history of tremors and quakes in New England, there is a definite history. All of these red dots indicate where quakes have been reported. And you may notice that there is sort of a clustering nature. Certain areas are favored over others, and there's really three little maxima across New England. One through the Lakes region of New Hampshire through Portland, Maine, another one upstate New York, southeastern Canada, and then a second one to north and west of New York City, and in between some sporadic reports of quakes. Now, as far as big quakes, a moderate to major one, let's say anything 5.5 or greater, extremely rare. When you look at the scatter plot here, you really have to go back to the 16, 17, and 1800s. The only significant 5.5 or greater quake, at least in modern history, was in central New Hampshire back in 1940 and in upstate New York, southeastern Canada in 1944. So to give you an idea of how rare strong quakes are, you really don't see too many here in southern New England, but the smaller ones are more common. Coming up at 6 o'clock, we'll talk about the mechanics as to why the ground shakes here in southern New England. That's coming up at 6.
Our in-depth coverage of the earthquake continues now. The Pinpoint News Tracker takes you to the epicenter where it was at the Port of Providence.
New at 6, what causes tremors here in Rhode Island and why they're different from the ones in California? Chief Meteorologist Tony Petrarca is here to explain now. Tony?
Well, of course, the mechanics are completely different here compared to the West Coast in California. Obviously, California has bigger quakes, so we'll take sort of a geology lesson now. Take a look, and you know, the outer shell of the Earth's crust, is almost like, I would really compare it to almost like an eggshell, and there are jigsaw puzzle pieces that sort of fit together that complete the outer shell of the Earth. And these big pieces of the puzzle are called plates, and these plates are massive, and where these plates rub up against each other are huge fault lines. Of course, one of the world famous fault lines in Southern California is the San Andreas Fault. So essentially you're looking at two huge continental plates. One's called the Pacific Plate, it's massive. The other is the North American Plate, and what you can get sometimes are both plates either rubbing up against each other or one going underneath the other. You call that a subluxation. So it's completely different here in southern New England. Now, as TJ had mentioned, we do have fault lines here in New England, but they tend to be almost like mini faults or stress fractures. They're not huge plates, continental plates rubbing up against each other. Of course, the center of the Earth has a tremendous amount of energy. It's very hot, and as energy is released from the center of the Earth, some of that energy is released through some of these minor fissures or cracks in the Earth's crust here in southern New England, and we get smaller quakes. So again, they're not huge plates like out in California, but nonetheless small, weaker fault lines here in New England, and we do have an earthquake history, even though most of the time they tend to be very weak. And that is your Geology Lesson 101.
All right, Tony, thank you. And we have in-depth coverage of the earthquake on the air and online.
And you can go to our website, WPRI.com, for a look back at the last time Rhode Island residents felt the ground shake during a series of earthquakes right over the border just a few months ago.